You're listening to the Handcrafted Therapy Podcast with massage therapist and business owner, Julie Alexander. That's me. I'm your host. I've been a massage therapist for 17 years, and I have a business marketing degree. On this podcast, we'll be interviewing industry professionals that can talk to us about how to run your business better, how to be a better massage therapist overall, and how to take care of yourself and give yourself a little love, a little self-care. Little grace in your life. I am so glad that you're here. Thanks so much for joining us today. All right, David, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to have you on. You're in a very exciting time of your life with the book and all the things that you've got going on, and I can't wait to share with our listeners all of the wonderful things that are happening in your world, if you don't mind sharing.
Of course not.
So first of all, can you tell us your story of how you got into massage therapy?
Well, my initial studies in college were in philosophy and particularly in music composition. That was my major, and that's what I got my degree in. Like many people in their first studies or first career, I was fascinated with the topic and with the activity of doing and writing music and so on. However, I discovered slowly that I didn't want to do it for a living. It's almost like I liked it too much to subject it to the marketplace. So I got into psychotherapy and counseling to determine, well, so what am I going to do with my life here? And I was, kind of at a low point. And I've got into Gestalt psychotherapy. And as you may know, Gestalt psychotherapy was the main person in it was Fritz Perls, was his name. And he himself worked mostly at the Esalen Institute. And he invited Ida Rolf to come to Esalen. And so he was responsible for her being there where she did her first Rolfing trainings. And so my Gestalt psychotherapist recommended that I get massage, that I get Rolfing, because I'd had a pretty intellectual education, but it's like my emotions and my body had lagged a bit behind my mind, which was in philosophy and abstract compositional ideas. And so I got massage. That was very helpful. I got Rolf. That blew my mind because it enabled me to get in touch with emotions that I really had not experienced as being kind of held in the body and in the nervous system. And it also showed me that I could be physically capable, not just intellectually capable. So I then began doing martial arts. And shortly thereafter, I formed a group in Chicago with a couple of Rolfers, some acupuncturists, yogis, where we met every Monday night and just exchanged information. It was a free group, and probably there was maybe a dozen people in it. And so that was my introduction to taking body work more seriously, to the point where I went, I don't want to just talk about this and I don't want to just experience it. I want to do it. So I started studying with Bob King, who was the founder of the Chicago School of Massage Therapy in 1977. And he was a wonderful teacher, fascinating and a cool guy. And he very much welcomed me, as did Jim Hackett, the other co-director. And so I worked with them. Then I studied. They sponsored a workshop from a Rolfer named Daniel Blake, who was a direct student of Ida Rolf's. And so I took advantage of that workshop, instructional bodywork with Daniel Blake, and did 500 hours of study with him, after which time I was really excited to do this offshoot of Rolfing that I'd learned. Plus, shortly thereafter, I began teaching anatomy at the Chicago School of Massage Therapy, which was the first place I started to really teach seriously.
What an incredible way to be introduced to massage. It always fascinates me, the stories on how massage therapists become therapists, because there's
Absolutely.
always a really cool story behind it, especially people in your position that have ended up writing books and teaching and becoming that's their career, right? It's not just a passing job that happens. And when, you focus your life on this kind of work, it's always fascinating to hear how it started, what the spark was that got the fire going.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much for sharing, because that is very interesting. I'm glad to hear that you were introduced to it and it helped you create a more mind-body connection within yourself, which opened up a whole new avenue for you in many ways, it sounds like. Will you please explain what zero balancing is?
Let me start by backing up a tiny bit. So, studying with Daniel Blake, the Rolfer, in 1982 and 83, really opened up and grounded my work in anatomy, which was very important to me to understand a little more deeply than in basic training the details of anatomy and to work more knowledgeably with body, mind, spirit. I studied with him, and then I was curious about cranial sacral work. And so I decided to study cranial sacral work, which showed me that with a fairly light touch, you could affect a person very deeply. Whereas the deep tissue that I was by now teaching at the Chicago School of Massage Therapy was, fairly heavy duty in terms of pressure. So cranial work told me, oh, wow, you can affect a person deeply through quality of touch rather than quantity of touch. So at that point, I changed what I was teaching, and instead of calling it deep tissue, I called it deep massage. And actually, a later book that I wrote is called The Deep Massage Book, and the emphasis is on deep in a mind-body sense. So after I started teaching deep massage, I had been invited to teach at AMTA conventions, particularly the first one I think was in Omaha in 1983. And then that person one person who heard me there said, would you like to come down and teach in some workshops in Texas? So I taught a workshop in Austin, Houston, and Dallas. And as you might expect, given my background, Austin attracted me the most. And so I moved here in 1984 and helped start a school called the Texas School of Massage Studies, which is owned by Sherry Glover. Now, at the same time, I was being introduced to zero balancing. I had written a book in conjunction with my workshops called Putting the Soul Back in the Body. That was my first book, a manual of imaginative anatomy for massage therapists. So I had put the soul back in the body as my kind of manual for the Texas workshops. I moved here. I began teaching just advanced classes and then started to teach basic and advanced classes at the Texas school. And it was during that time that I'd been hearing about zero balancing, and I was curious about, well, what's this zero balancing? It's a word that is not self-explanatory in terms of, well, what does it do? What does it mean? So I started looking into it. I got a couple of sessions. One of my first sessions just blew my mind because I was very fatigued going into it. And after 20 minutes of work, I got up and I was like, just ready, like a fighter. I couldn't believe the transformation in terms of my energy in just one simple short session. So I invited the founder of Zero Balancing, who I had already do an interview for Massage Therapy Journal, which at that time I was the editor of. His name is Dr. Fritz Smith. And Fritz also resided at Esalen. So distinct from Fritz Perls, Fritz Smith is the founder of Zero Balancing. And we met 85, I think, at this Washington AMTA convention. We met for breakfast. I liked him right away. He was a really nice person. He seemed to be as interested in me as me in him. And then he gave a talk. And that talk was straight into what I was wondering about those days, because having studied a variety of things, and not just cranial sacral, I'd studied shiatsu, I'd studied all sorts of things. I nonetheless felt like it was something I wasn't touching in the person, and I couldn't understand. What could it be? Well, he started by shortly talking about that we have layers of our anatomy. We have the skin, we have the muscles, the organs, the bones. And he said, and because we're alive, each of these conveys an energy too. It's not just a physical structure. And the skin conveys a very different energy than the bones, for instance. The skin is our surface tension, and it has the function of kind of being an insulatory, protective layer. And then deeper than that is the voluntary layer that we can work with our muscles, and they help sustain us as do our organs. And then he said, and the deepest layer of energy is flowing through your bones. And that's what zero balancing works with, is the energy and the structure in your bones. And I was like, oh my God, I literally felt a light bulb light up over my head. And I thought, that's it. That's what I've not been touching. I've not been touching the bones with the same quality of mindfulness, compassion, attention as I was approaching the soft tissue. So then I decided to, start studying zero balancing, which I started studying in 86, now almost 40 years ago. And so zero balancing, it worked with the energy and the structure of the skeletal system. To me, we are musculoskeletal therapists as massage therapists, body workers, chiropractors, whatever. We're musculoskeletal therapists, and most therapists do not know the skeletal aspect of their work. They know the muscular aspect. That's what's emphasized in massage school, certainly. But that's only half of the issue. There's a skeletal system. Of course, underlying all that is energy, aka nervous system. Zero balancing was my window into the skeletal system, and it has continued along with my deep massage teaching as the main thing that I teach. Deep massage, correlating ideas from my own and zero balancing to soft tissue, whereas zero balancing aiming more precisely at the skeletal system.
So let me ask you this question. We often hear massage therapists call themselves soft tissue workers.
Right.
And bones are not soft tissue. So
it depends on your definition of soft.
That's true.
Bones are 30% water, and bones are surrounded by periosteum, which is soft tissue, and bones are connected through ligaments, which are soft tissue. So you can't, in a way, be addressing the body, even though you're not thinking periosteum or ligament, you're always going to be engaging them. And so I would contend that it's not as distinct from soft tissue as sometimes people think.
Well, and it was kind of a trick question because our bodies are one unit and you can't separate the nervous system and the bones and this. I mean, you could, but somebody's got to be dead to do it.
That's right. And that's definitely contraindicated for our clients.
Yes. Yes, it is. Well, thank you for explaining that. That is really some incredible ways of looking at the body and energy in the body. Can you explain to me how a zero balancing session may work?
In terms of mechanically, what am I doing, or what effect might it have, or both?
Both.
Well, zero balancing, when it's done on its own, and it combines very nicely with many other forms of body work, so it's not exclusive. And it doesn't take a superior attitude toward other ways of working. Everybody is unique. And, the modality ultimately is not the healing element. The healing is something the person's own self does. So sometimes people say, well, isn't this powerful work? Well, not if the person doesn't respond to it. So the question is, what do people respond to? Now, if I think or they ask that they'd like to explore this zero balancing, they've heard about it and so on, then I do take a history, and then we begin to do the session. Usually first session, I'll spend up to 15 minutes taking a systematic history to get a good sense of the person, their structure, their energy, their life. So zero balancing done solely is done clothed, as is cranial sacral work, shiatsu, and so on. So people can keep and should basically keep all their clothes on for a pure zero balancing. They start seated, and the first thing I do is evaluate the movement of their shoulder girdle and then the level of tension that's being held in the trapezius and the ribs underlying that. Then I go down and explore the sacrum and have the person lean to the right and the left and feel for any particular tension that's in the sacrum or sacroiliac joint. So that's a seated evaluation. Then we have the person lie down, and zero balancing is almost always done in just supine, face up position, as is, for instance, cranial work, a lot of shiatsu, and so on. And so they're lying down. And then the first thing I do is I go to the feet and do a kind of a gentle traction through the feet, feeling for how the energy travels through their whole system. Then I come up to the so-called dorsal hinge, which is around ribs 10, 11, 12, and I feel for tension there in those really lower ribs and off the tips of the lumbar transverse processes, and then I go to the sacrum. So there's a number of passes we do through the lower rib cage, lumbars, and sacrum. Then we go to the hip and do a very kind of sophisticated, gentle traction through the hip that engages and facilitates the energy flow to now move through the back and the hip and into the legs. Then we go to the feet and evaluate the movement of the feet, kind of mimicking what happens to the bones there when the person walks and how free those bones and ankles are. So that constitutes a lower body work. Then we go to the head of the table, check in with the person, see how it's going, and then we begin where we left off. We dealt with ribs 10 through 12. Now I'm going to feel for the level of tension that may be held in ribs 9 through 1. And that I'm going to do a couple of times. Each time I go through, I add a little bit more pressure into the places where I feel there is some tension. Then we go to the neck and evaluate the neck with 6 different movements, very sophisticated evaluation of the neck in ZB, which really gives us a much better window on what's going on there, since people are not only preoccupied with back, shoulders, but also neck usually. So then we do a certain number of moves. In zero balancing, we don't call what we're doing techniques, we call them fulcrums. So we do a number of neck fulcrums until we feel like there's been greater freedom. And the person often will report that, oh my God, I feel like I'm feeling like I'm 7 feet long now by the decompression that's taking place through their whole system. Then we evaluate and work with the trapezius, work with the back of the scapula, with the back of the shoulder joint, and then we go to the arms and facilitate flow through the humerus, radius, ulna, wrist bones, and hands. And so we do these so-called fulcrums through the arms. Then we come back and commonly may go back a little bit to a little more rib cage or rib or neck work. And then we check in with the person again. How are you feeling? I would like this session to feel really complete for you. Is there any place where you'd like a little more attention? So that gives them a chance to really, say what's going on with them. And, they'll say, well, I feel something in my hip or in my ankle, or because I want them to go away going, I can't imagine anything more. He touched on everything, and I feel like, renewed, or whatever else they feel. There can be many, many different therapeutic responses. And so then we have the person stand up, walk around a little bit so that they feel in their movement what's changed, what's shifted, and they report a little on it. We chat about it for a few moments, and then they usually come back. And most commonly, I'll see a person 3 times within the scope of about 6 weeks, depending on what's going on with them. Then at the end of 3 sessions, we reevaluate. And commonly, I'll have people come once a month, sometimes for the rest of their life, if they feel like it. It's just like exercise, it's a toning of one's structure and energy. But it all depends on the person.
And in these fulcrums, are you palpating?
Yeah. One thing that characterizes zero balancing is that we always evaluate an area before we put in a fulcrum. So, and the evaluations are not just diagnostic in the narrow sense. What we realize is that when we palpate with integrity, anatomical knowledge, and care, then you're giving the person information about themselves. So it's not just I'm getting information, I'm giving information. So one could do a whole session of nothing but evaluations, and the person would go, wow, I feel fantastic. Because there's body-mind learning when you bring the person's attention into the various parts of themselves and the energy flows through them. So there is definitely evaluation. And then, of course, on the basis of each of those evaluations, then we apply fulcrums as called for. And sometimes we'll repeat them. The view is better to do a few more repetitions rather than hold something for a long, long time. We want the person to be wanting more rather than wanting less.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. What are the contraindications, or are there any?
Well, there's contraindications to massage, and they're pretty much the same for zero balancing. If the person has any serious illness, we would question whether we should do a session, needless to say. If they have osteoporosis, if they have a history of dislocation, things that have to do a little bit more with the skeletal system, that would concern us. But basically, your average list of contraindications for massage is pretty much the same as for zero balancing.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so talk to us about the newest book that you got out.
Oh, yeah. Well, fun story. So I mentioned Putting the Soul Back in the Body, my first book. Well, about 3 years ago, someone who'd studied with me and who is a colleague named Jeff Rockwell, who's a chiropractor, who also has studied Canadian osteopathy. He's studied zero balancing. He's studied variants of Rolfing like me. We've struck up a good collegial friendship. He called me up and he said, I want to write a book with you. And I was like, really? I said, like what kind of book? He said, well, I want it to be like you're putting the soul back in the body, which, as I told you, focused on the muscles. What that did was it focused on each muscle in the body, each major muscle. And I wrote about a page or two of my reflections, both imaginative and clinical, about those muscles. So Jeff said, I want to do it about the bones. And I said, well, that's interesting. And I didn't know him as a writer. So I said, well, why don't you send me a sample of your writing so I get a sense of that? So he sent me his ideas about the sternum. So I said, all right, let's do it. And I also had thought of a book that I love by an author named John Berger, who's a novelist, art critic, brilliant guy, one of my heroes. And this book was called I Send You This Cadmium Red. And it was an exchange between him and an artist friend of his going into, each of them would write about a certain color. So Berger would write, okay, here's my understandings and things that I think about when I think about indigo. Then his friend John would say, well, indigo reminds me of this. And he'd like draw a picture, a colored picture, whatever. So there's this great book of dialogue about colors. So I said, let's do, if you're up for it, a dialogue about the bones. And each of us write our hit of the callus and the calcaneus, or the patella, or the femur, or the ribs, and so on. So he said, yeah, that's great. So that's what we did. We started by exchanging letters, emails back and forth. Also, we had a lot of wild illustrations that didn't necessarily find their way into the book, which we downloaded, pirated from the web, But anyhow, we exchanged these letters. And after a while, we came close to covering all the bones in the body, and it occurred to us, well, maybe somebody would like to publish this. It's an unusual format and fairly far out as far as the way in which we're looking at bones, as well as being clinically, based. And so we approached the publisher right away. They said, yeah, let's do it. It's a wonderful publisher called Singing Dragon, who have published a lot of body work, acupuncture, yoga books, very highly respected, beautiful publisher. So they were interested. So then we modified what we'd written so far, not just to being letters to each other, but aiming them more at the reader than at each other. So we changed our language a bit and, of course, revised it. We found an incredible illustrator who actually had illustrated one of my previous books called The Deep Massage Book, someone in Austin named Christy Crames, who has her master's in medical illustration and a very kind of Michelangelo, Leonardo feeling to her illustrations. Very true to the anatomy, but with this kind of magical quality of shadow and light and just beautiful. So we got 24 illustrations by Christie. We got the book written. We had it edited by a number of friends and well as Hamstring Publishing. And here we are. It's just come out. Its title is The Memory Palace of Bones. And the subtitle is Exploring Embodiment Through the Skeletal System. Now, just to explain Memory Palace for a second, Memory Palace was an idea that was used first in Rome as a way to help remember things. Remember, when people were learned back in those days, part of it was a function of how much they could memorize because there weren't a lot of books. They had to remember. So being wise, part of that was having a very good memory. And so there are a variety of systems to aid and amplify memory, the primary one of which was called the Memory Palace, which was where the person would imagine a palace or a sacred building in their mind. And then they would imagine populating different rooms with things that they wanted to remember. So it was like an inner library almost of images and scenes and ideas that would be created in their imagination and held in this so-called memory palace. So I said to Jeff, let's call it the Memory Palace of Bones. And he said, yeah, let's do that. So that's where that thing came from.
That is incredible. I have to interrupt you with a quick little story. I took a class when I was young with my dad about how to remember things. I don't remember what it was called, but there's a lot of memory tricks that, relate to rooms and hallways and stuff. And I always call my brain the brain halls when I'm talking to my friends. Let me dig that out of the closet in the back of my brain hall because things live in different sections of your brain. And I just love the fact that you use that metaphor for your book. I think that's incredible.
You're an inhabitant of the Memory Palace.
I am. I love it. I love it. As people, massage therapists, chiropractors, PTs, all of the people that will buy your book and read it. What would you like them to know going into the book? How would you like them to approach the reading?
Well, first of all, I would tell them to please read only one or two sections at a time, because it's important to dwell on that bone, to think about your own reflections, and to kind of let it really digest and assimilate rather than reading a book straight through, which is kind of good news. A lot of us are too busy to read a 250-page book. Well, I say, please don't. Read these things. And something else that distinguishes our book, that was a suggestion made when we first had people looking at it, was to add to each chapter what we call an embodiment. And so every chapter ends with an exercise composed either by Jeff or by me that's experiential. So it may be a mindfulness, bringing your awareness into your tibia. It may be a movement exercise. It may be a technique that you can use as a body worker. So we have 24 embodiments accompanying the 24 chapters. So that also says, allow enough time to do the embodiment. Don't just read it, embody it. That's the whole point. And of course, one of the biggest lessons is to realize that bones are not just physical things. Bones are alive. And I like to say bones carry a message. Every bone has evolved over eons of evolution, and every bone represents a solution to how you walk, how you stand, how you protect the different organs, and so on. So every bone has a message. Every bone has an evolution. Every bone is a repository of learning. And so in order to really appreciate that fact, you need to meditate on that bone and get in touch with the aliveness of it. And another thing to mention about that is that it turns out that whereas the mind is distributed through the nervous system and so on. The bones, when we say, I just know that in my bones, we take that as being not just a metaphor. We take that as being literally true and saying the deepest knowledge that is in us is in our bones. So bones are a repository in Chinese medicine. They say the flow of energy through the bones is the ancestral qi. It's not your personal qi, it's the ancestral qi. And that goes along with our idea of, these evolved, learned structures within us. So getting in touch with the bones is also a way to get in touch with your spirit, the part of you that lies deeper than your personality, this kind of more the source energy, which is another way that Chinese medicine talks about ancestral qi. It's your source. We don't get our lives from ourselves. We get our lives along the tree of life. And that's not just a figure of speech, that's a genetic tree that we are all part of, each of us being an articulation or a note in that symphony of life that we're all connected through. I hope it's not too far out, but
no, that's I love it. I mean, you were talking about, really marinating in your book and taking each bone in and it made me think of like a good Texas barbecue. You're in Austin and I'm in Dallas.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you have a good barbecue, it might take hours to marinate or maybe even days to really, and some steaks are aged years.
Yeah.
I mean, and to really really take time to taste the right information under your tongue and work a few days with, with your clients and think about what those few pages have taught you and then come back and, read a couple more pages and
for sure, because every chapter should illuminate your work, especially the person doing zero balancing, but in general, that you think to yourself, oh, I'm really going to appreciate the tibia and all it does. Today, I'm going to pay particular attention to the tibia and the muscles which are surrounding it, of course.
Yeah.
The epigraph for the book is a cool one. I'm going to read it to you.
That would be fantastic.
This is from Franz Kafka, of course, the incredible novelist. I am always trying to convey something that can't be conveyed, to explain something which is inexplicable, to talk about something I have in my bones, something which can be expressed only in the bones.
Okay.
And what you said is very relevant, although I've not often had our book compared to barbecue and aged steaks, but I think that's totally appropriate. And that's to say that we live in a society where people will move pretty quickly through from one thing to another and not take the time to savor their life, to savor the food they're eating, to savor the breath, to really appreciate and give us a time to just, look at a flower. Don't just go, oh, there's a blue on it. Get into it. As a body worker, of course, we get a whole hour, which is precious because, the average medical professional spends not more than 5 minutes with a patient.
Yeah.
He has 60 minutes. We get to savor that, who that person is. And that in itself is a tremendous gift, to give the gift of time and attention and mindfulness as we do in zero balancing. We work, interestingly enough, I exchanged with my original Rolfer just yesterday as a conversation, because I was talking about observation skills and the fact that Ida Rolf and other great people had incredible observation skills to see posture and see response. And he said, yes, but you know what Ida had even more? And he was also with my teacher, Daniel Blake. He was an original student of Ida Rolf. He said, she got permission. And he said, that's what distinguished her work even more so, was to get the permission from the person on the table, largely through the clarity and the intention and the knowledge that was in her touch. And I thought that was a very beautiful point. And in Zero Balancing, we also talk about that. where an NT massage, the person is the one doing the letting go. I'm not letting go of their tension. They have to do the letting go. And that means they have to give me permission to touch them on a level that I can help facilitate their own letting go. So that was, I think, an important point that he brought up, getting permission with quality and knowledge of touch.
I absolutely agree. You know, one thing that in my practice that I like to talk to my clients about is, you know, I'm helping facilitate your healing process, but I'm not the only one working here. I need not only your permission for you to relax, but I need you to relax.
Yeah.
Right. I need you to actively participate in your massage process and your healing process. And I think that's a really good point, because a lot of us, we go to work, we do our massages, we come home, but I think that there's a deeper connection that we can make with our clients. And it's a collaborative effort between the two, therapist and client. It's a dance. It's a work of art. And you have to communicate with your client. I often find myself communicating throughout the entire massage, but not everybody does that. And that's completely, everybody has their own way and methods of doing things, right?
Well, studies say that 93% of communication is nonverbal.
Yeah.
And that means touch, gesture, and so on. So we're communicating the whole time.
Yes. Yes. Well, another one of my favorite phrases is, I listen with my hands.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think, I love the fact that you use that. I feel it in my bones. I mean, we've all had that feeling of, I feel it in my bones that this person is a good person, or I feel it in my bones that this is going to be a very successful business, or, whatever you're feeling. I just think that's an important thing to, like, a very non-visceral. I mean, it's very abstract kind of a concept to think about.
Yeah. And of course, it's deeper than visceral, because viscera is the guts and the enteric nervous system. But we're talking about the proposition that there's a subjective sense of ultimacy that's reserved for the bones. When we say, I know it in my bones, that means I know it in the deepest place in me. So the deepest place in you is your bones. And if you really focus on bones, what you start to see is that you start to let go of that imagery of them being as hard, non-living things. And you start to see, oh, this is just my depths that we're talking about. Because experientially, if you look into your body, you don't experience hardness in your bones. What you experience is, okay, this is the depth of me. It's quite different when people start to relate to the actual experience of bones from the inside, and the experience of the energy that's in the bones that we have all the time, that we're not often drawn to. And of course, that's what zero balancing does.
That's fabulous. I love your work. I'm so thrilled that you took the time to explain this zero balancing in your book, and, the history of how you got here. You've had a long career in this business, and we want to glean as much information as possible from you as we have new massage therapists coming into the business. And as we develop as a human society, we have new problems that come in. I mean, sure, it's changed a lot since the 70s. We're now at the computer a lot with the forward shoulder movement and forward head tilt. It's a lot more prevalent now than it was back when you started in massage school, I'm sure.
Yeah. Interesting to work with people. So often they're relieved, whether they're studying deep massage with me or zero balancing, they're so relieved to know that they don't have to wipe themselves out by efforting to overcome the resistance of their client.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you approach them with that knowledge and care and so on, and the information that, okay, this is a collaboration, then it changes the therapeutic relationship. Interesting enough, a study was done saying which modality is most powerful. And what they concluded was not one or the other was most powerful. The only genuine predictor of therapeutic outcomes was the quality of the therapeutic relationship, not the modality, but the quality of the relationship between the practitioner and their client. And so that's what we're obliged to cultivate. And speaking of which, like I say, students are relieved to hear this, and I'm still teaching at our school. Of course, I'm teaching a certification program in zero balancing this year, the first intensive certification program that's ever been offered in the world. I'm teaching in Costa Rica, deep massage. I think it's a 10-day intensive in deep massage. I'm going to be teaching in Bristol, England. I've been teaching in England for over 20 years, and at the Bristol College of Massage Therapy, at the Downey School of Massage in Maine, run by Nancy Dale, an old friend. So I'm still actively putting it out there. I'm teaching the 4 classes in Austin this year: Zero Balancing 1, 2, Alchemy of Touch, and Geometry of Healing. After people do those 4, they then will qualify to be certified as practitioners of zero balancing. So, as well as, more importantly, wanting the students to put it out there in their work, because that multiplies vastly how many people get this quality of attention and touch. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's awesome.
Uh-huh.
And we'll get all of the links that you need so that people can click and sign up for classes that are upcoming. Sure. Keep your eyes open for what David's got going on in the future, because it sounds like, I want to take your class. That's for sure. I can't read the book.
You're a kindred soul for sure. I can feel it.
Yeah.
Beautiful questions, Julie.
Well, thank you.
Personal commentary as well.
Well, thank you. I love this podcast. It means a lot to me. I just feel like I want to share with the massage community the passion that I have for our industry. And I know many of us are out there that have a lot of love and passion for this healing modality that we call massage therapy. And I just am so grateful for you and the leaders in our industry that help pave the way to let us learn more and think about things like the bones that we might not, as massage therapists, think about on a regular basis. So I think people. It's really important. We may focus on the soft tissue, the fascia and the muscles and the tendons and ligaments and things like that on a regular basis. But I love the idea of incorporating more in the bones. I've taken some orthopedic massage classes where, you manipulate the bones to work on the joint muscles, for instance, but you only think of it as a lever, rather than an entity that actually is living and breathing just like the muscle tissue.
Exactly.
How exciting. What a great way to introduce bones to massage therapists.
Yeah. And I say about my book, I say, this is a really great book, especially for people who have bones.
Yes. I saw that.
So happens that that's a vast number of people.
It really is. Unless you're a big blob of nothing.
That's right. In which case, all the fascia in the world won't do you that much good.
That's right. Okay, well, good. Is there anything else? Any nuggets of wonderful knowledge that you'd like to share with my audience before we go?
Well, I have a newsletter that comes out once a month. You can create links to that. And I have 5 books. I have Putting Soul Back in the Body. I have a collection online that's an online CE called The Art of Massage. I have a biography of Fritz Smith called Life in the Bones, a biography of Dr. Fritz Smith and zero balancing. And I've got my deep massage book. Subtitle is how to combine structure and energy in body work. And then this latest one. So 5 books. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, you're in the 5 book club.
I'm
That's
telling you,
amazing.
it's kind of fascinating. And I'm studying writing myself in addition to all these things that I'm doing. I'm fascinated with trying to how you can put it into words and communicate it best to people, whether you're teaching or writing an essay or a book or whatever. It's like we said, this is communication, some of which is verbal, a great deal of which is nonverbal as well when we're doing body.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that's some other thoughts.
I do want to reiterate something that you said earlier. The most successful massage therapy sessions are between people, the massage therapist and the client, who have the best relationship.
Right. The only predictor of positive therapeutic outcomes is the quality of the therapeutic relationship. And that really takes us out of, partly the illusion that just knowing anatomy or just approaching people orthopedically is enough, because you've got to have that therapeutic relationship. That's the bottom line of not only of massage therapy, but of course of psychotherapy, etc. So, and the good news is it's a healthier way for the therapist to live, to know that their success is tied to the nourishing aspects of their therapeutic relationship. That way, it's not all up to you. And these relationships, as I say, are a source of nourishment for both people. Mm-hmm. Therefore, you're able to have greater longevity as a therapist. Whereas if you're just solely trying to, like I said, search and destroy people's tension, and a lot of clients kind of expect you to do that, then you need to, as you've been doing, Julie, and I too, educate them that it's the relationship. I don't need to say to them, let's have a good relationship. But by treating them well, by really knowing anatomy, by touching with a great deal of clarity, then that therapeutic relationship is a result. Rolfers call themselves somatic educators. That's another way to look at that, and how do we embody, and the fascination of how do you really create the optimum therapeutic relationship? It's a fascinating question.
It is. And I mean, we've covered this subject in almost every one of my episodes. I talk about the trust component between the client and the therapist, and how important it is to immediately establish trust between you and your client in both directions, not just one direction, but in both directions. You have to be able to trust them just as much as they can trust you, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to work out in therapy if you don't trust them and if they don't trust you, because they'll tense up if they don't trust you. And if you don't trust them, you're not going to be able to do your best work on them, because you might be afraid of something.
Yeah, you have got to be wholehearted.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think most therapists are in this to help other people. We're not millionaires, most of us. I'm not a millionaire. And I know I'm in it because I want to truly help people. And I think most of us are. And as we go through our career, we have to remember that we are in this to help other people. Be kind. Be kind to yourself, be kind to other people on a regular basis as you work on people, because life is hard. We've got a lot of things we have to deal with out in the big world, and, nobody's excluded from that. So it's just refreshing to come into a massage session and be able to find a good connection with your therapist. And if you can do that with your clients, you'll be successful immediately, no matter what modality you use.
Exactly.
But I'm very thankful that zero balancing is a tool that many people can use in their toolbox, along with all of the other tools that we have. I think this is a fabulous thing that as massage therapists and chiropractors and other people can use to help facilitate the healing process. So excellent.
All right.
Thank you so much for joining me on the Handcrafted Therapy podcast. I would love to hear from you. You can email us at podcast@handcraftedtherapy.com, or you can come by the store. It's at 3303 North Central Expressway, suite number 240 in Plano, Texas, 75023. Or you can connect with me on social, Instagram, Facebook, #HandcraftedTherapy. I'm Julie Alexander, and I wish you a very happy and healthy day.